navigating contested terrain in the 21st century. My name is Melissa, and I am so thrilled and honored to be your moderator for tonight's event. So in our presence, we have a lineup of very distinguished panelists that I'm so excited to introduce to you. Look forward to that tonight. So to begin, I would like to thank our sponsors for making this event happen. Thank you so much for your generosity and for bringing all of us together to use this space for our learning. And as you know, we are currently on the platform Zoom, so I'm sure all of you know already as we live through the COVID times. We have a couple of Zoom protocols and norms that we'd like to establish first, making sure that our mute button is on, and unless you are speaking, that is absolutely okay. And also, please participate in the chat. So we will have some of our colleagues monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions or comments, thoughts as we go through our session, please be sure to enter in the chat and we can engage in that way. On top of our Zoom protocols, we also have a couple of norms that we have slightly compressed compared to the last one that we had. Thank you to the recommendation by many of you. So we have reduced it to 5, which still capture the themes that are very important. These norms are not only important for our students as we navigate challenging conversations and set the foundation, but also for us as we engage in our own challenging conversation today. And as we go into our breakout rooms later on, I just ask that we, number one, balance safety and challenge our thinking, engage with challenging ideas, be humble, recognize your social position and perspective, and I need to move this, perfect. Be present and engage in active listening. So these are adapted from the Courageous Conversations that many of you know. So these are our norms. Moving on now, something that is very important and very timely with our conversation. I would like to begin our meeting in a good way. And so I will begin with a land acknowledgement based off of where I am here in Markham, Ontario. So the land I am on is the traditional territory of 5 Indigenous communities. First, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the Mississaugas. And this land is part of the Williams Treaties. If you take a look on the left side of the screen, you will see a map. This is a tool that some of our educators may find useful, and I encourage you to take a look at this link as well. That's something you can use to learn where you are in the traditional territories you are on. And it's important to recognize, yes, this is a good tool, but it's only a starting point. So if you use this tool, be sure to extend your research and reach out to Indigenous leaders in your area as well, and to consult them and just use this as a starting point. I'm going to pause here because I do invite all of you to lean in and listen to this next part that I'm going to read because it's very important to what we're speaking to today. The land acknowledgement allows us to show gratitude to the Indigenous nations that lived and took care of the land we live on, and recognize the forcible removal of First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous people to create our present nation. This is one way we can voice our respect and responsibility in strengthening relationships with our Indigenous neighbors. Now, I just wanted to highlight the piece where we said forcible removal of First Nations and Métis and Indigenous people. And this is something that may evoke certain emotions in you. It's uncomfortable. This is just one of many things that have happened to Indigenous people in Canada and continue to happen to Indigenous people in Canada. So these conversations, it's hard because it creates these emotions in us and makes us uncomfortable, but it is something we do have to talk about. It's the truth and reconciliation. And hopefully by the end of this session, we will learn some strategies and learn from our panelists as to how we can engage in these conversations. And this is just one piece of it. A quote this reminds me of is one by Cynthia Batio. She is the recipient of the 2022 Governor General's History Award. And she says this: if students do not see themselves in Canadian history, then they do not know that this history and the responsibilities that come with it are theirs. Right? We often get this dissociation with history, but recognizing how students can connect with this history. This is their history. And this is why we talk about the land acknowledgement as well. Through doing this work, students have realized that this history belongs to all of us and that they have a relevant place in the various narratives of this country. So I'm going to leave this quote with you to think about in the back of your head as we proceed with our event tonight. To start us off, I've been talking a lot, so hopefully I can have some of your engagement now. As you know, we introduce teaching strategies that you can implement in your classroom right away, starting tomorrow morning if you want. So this is our first one. This is a poll that I invite all of you to participate in that will be dropping in the chat box very soon. And I ask you to consider the following. You will be able to rank your agreeability to each of the following statements in our Padlet. First, are your students or peers interested in topics about history? I know we are a group of history teachers, so we may be a little biased ourselves, but what about our students? Are they interested in history? How comfortable are you with having challenging conversations in your history classroom? And thirdly, should controversial historical monuments be taken down? This is the talk of the town. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so my colleague can share our live results. And as we are populating this poll, I'm just going to share some of the pedagogy that's behind something as simple as polling. And I'm sure many of you have used polling before in your own classrooms, but just thinking about how a poll, something as simple as a poll, can help not only the teacher, but the students. First, for the teacher, it could engage more of your students, right? It's something that's very low risk. Students are encouraged to think before they speak rather than jumping into having a discussion right away. Having a poll allows you to really think about where you are before engaging in a conversation. So that way we are engaging and making this more accessible to our students. And again, for the teacher perspective, we can use this poll to see where your class is at, kind of reading the temperature of the room almost. And that can determine how you want to proceed with your lesson, the pace of it, maybe some things to take out, and just maybe recognize some sensitivities that are in the classroom as well. So I'm looking at the votes. We have about half of them in. Very interesting. And I guess on the students' side, for them, it's a great way to interact with technology. Of course, you can do this in a non-digital way, but this is a way we can use Padlet. This is we can use technology in our classroom. And again, it's more comfortable because it's anonymous. And maybe it's a way for us to show that maybe you're not alone in this way you think. You might think, oh, it's just me who thinks this way, but take a look. Our results are pretty much spread out here. We have a couple more coming in. But I ask you to hold on to this thought because we will use this as we conclude our session as well. So that is a strategy you can use to introduce a poll in the beginning, see where your thinking is, and then after our session, see how our thinking has maybe changed or evolved or even stayed the same. That's perfectly okay too. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. So with that in mind, I would like to show you some alternatives that could be useful for your classroom if you do not prefer using an online poll as such. you are open to use other alternatives that are more visual. For example, we have the Dotmocracy. This is one where students are provided with stickers. Of course, this is a little bit hard to be anonymous because you can see where students are sticking, but in the same way, you can kind of read a room and see where everyone is at in the beginning of a session. It's a great minds-on to introduce a topic. And we also have feedback frames. So this one is a little bit more anonymous. All right, so that is our first teaching strategy and a great segue into the conversations that we will be having today. Without further ado, I would like to take this time to introduce our wonderful, wonderful panelists that have taken time out of their busy schedules to join us tonight. So I hope you are very excited, as I am too. So, oh, sorry. Before I do that, we have the framing questions. This time we did it a little differently. I just want to put the questions up front for all of you to see. If this is, I invite all of you to, if you want to take a picture of, if you want to screenshot it, we will continue to post the questions in the chat bar as our conversation continues. But I just want to offer this as an opportunity to let you know some of the questions that we will be discussing today. Right, going to give you 5 seconds to do that. 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Now, this is also what I wanted to mention. I'm keeping you guys on your toes today. Before we continue with introducing our panelists, I know you're Melissa, hurry up. But I do want you to be aware of the second teaching strategy that we'll be showcasing after our panel discussion. Just note that we will be asking you to record some things that you hear. So it could be a quote, it could be a certain fact, it could be an idea or a thought. So just take notes of certain things that you hear that resonate with you. I'll elaborate more on this later on, but I just want to let you know, please take notes of quotes or ideas that kind of stand out to you. Okay. First panelist, please join me in welcoming our first panelist. Ms. Rachel Collishaw is recognized as a leader in developing professional learning and classroom resources that use historical thinking concepts to support inquiry learning. She is the recipient of the 2013 Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching. And tonight, Rachel will be representing SSENC, which is the Social Studies Educator Network of Canada. Right. So that is our first panelist. Our second panelist is Miss Heidi Berger. Heidi Berger is the founder and president of the Foundation for Genocide Education based in Montreal. She is also an award-winning video producer and former professor of communications at Concordia University in Montreal and the child of Holocaust survivors. Welcome, Heidi. And lastly, last but not least, we have Miss Jasmine Wong. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jasmine. Jasmine is Associate Program Director with Facing History and Ourselves Canada. She has facilitated professional learning on the histories of identity-based hate with educators for over a decade. Jasmine has also worked as a classroom teacher and adult education facilitator in New Delhi, Kampala, Boston, and Toronto as well. She will be representing Facing History and Ourselves. So as you can tell, our panel is extremely loaded tonight. So we have a lot to talk about. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see our panelists here. So our first question for tonight, how can we engage and interest students in conversations about history? I don't know about you. I always hear Miss Chan, oh, I hate history. So I know, again, we're maybe a little biased being in a room of history teachers, but I'm going to point this question first to Rachel, as SSENC has developed some resources to help engage our students in topics such as the Korean War. Rachel, what are your thoughts on engaging and interesting our students in history?
Thanks, Melissa. I think I could probably go on for the whole hour about how to engage and interest students in history, but I'll keep my remarks a little bit brief. What is the time that you're going to give me a warning when I run out of time?
Perfect. Yeah,
Okay,
2 to 3 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. So number one is really thinking about primary sources and historical thinking. So, using, I think in this room, we've got a great group of people who are already doing a lot of this work, and that's great. So historical thinking, asking good questions. One of the things that really engaged my students in getting really good at being interested in history was by having course questions. So framing questions for the whole course, like, is Canada a country you could be proud of? Or how did we get here? So just trying to frame your whole course in a way that is going to engage them. And then having those questions that drive units or lessons as well. And so keeping them engaged in those questions and returning to those questions as you kind of go through. I do have this book, which is sort of behind me, and I'll show it here. So we at the Social Studies Educators Network of Canada produced this book in collaboration with a whole lot of partners, and about Canada's participation in the Korean War. And one of the things that teachers really need to do this, ask good questions and find the answers, is to have actual document sets. So curated sets that are related to a question, that are at reading level for students for their classroom. So that's what we've done with this book. And I've done it with there's lots of great resources out there already that do this. And so that's one way that I would do it. And in this book, we frame the questions as compelling questions. So not just an inquiry question or a big question or an essential question. And, it's a little bit semantics, but I really like the idea of the compelling question because it compels students. They want to engage in it, but also it compels them to find the evidence to answer the question. And you're giving them the evidence as well to read through, to access, to look at. So you're not kind of sending them out into the wilds of the internet. You're kind of in this contained space where you've got this great set of documents for students to examine.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. I love that you bring in the idea of questions. And I'm going to draw on your point on primary sources here, because I know, Heidi, you work closely with survivors of genocide and you have a personal connection as well. So coming from that lens, I wonder, do you have any other perspectives on how you can engage students in that way? No worries.
So I really believe that students by nature are interested in history, and especially in controversial topics in history. Teachers really have to tap into this interest. And as you know, genocide is my area of expertise because of the foundation. And by showing the connection between past history and present day events, history starts to become alive and relevant for young people. So we've taken the approach in the guide that we've developed with the Quebec government called Studying Genocide. And we start by choosing a big question, just like what was mentioned previously, like what is the role of foreign governments in genocides taking place in a country? And then you choose a past or present day genocide, review the facts and the stages of genocide for that case study, and allow students to ask questions and then take a position. This, to us, engages students in a learner-centered, active approach instead of a teacher-centered, passive pedagogy. And of course, another great way to engage students in history is to focus on the individual, the human element. And what we do is we send presentations given by survivors or descendants of survivors. Right now, we're using the 9 recognized genocides of the 20th century, recognized by UN and Canada. We send out live presentations, including First Nations, because what we've seen after we give these presentations, that again and again, that history is best learned by listening to the stories of those who lived it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. And I love the piece that you said about bringing that human element. Sometimes it's so easy to think it's, oh, just in the past, but these are real people, real stories. And so, Jasmine, I hope that you can kind of add on to this idea. I noticed on Facing History and Ourselves, there's kind of an emphasis on creating a better future, using lessons of the past to create a better future. So how can we draw that connection from the past to the present and even in the future?
Yeah, I'll get to that question, but I wanted to start with the first part, which is around engaging and interesting students in conversations in history. And I want to do this in a very facing history way. And so I love that this is live. And so I actually want to pose a question to all of our audience. I see Jan is smiling. You know this is very facing history. We want to start with ourselves and that reflection on ourselves. And so I put it in chat. I want you to bring to mind, and then in the chat, name the teacher who got you really excited to learn. And also, what did they teach? So, chat is open. And while you're thinking about that teacher that engaged you in learning and what they taught, I'll share that one of my favorite teachers is Miss Talbot, and she was an art teacher. I was that student in the classroom who actually disliked history. And so this question around how we engage and interest students in history is actually very personal and relevant to me. I now love history. And I can see here that so many of you are both, you love history, and you're history teachers, and yet the kinds of topics that you're talking about, the names that you're bringing to mind, they're not all history teachers. We are whole people when we come into the classroom. And the students that enter into our classrooms, you know this as well as educators, that not all of them are going to love history. Some of them are going to love French. Some of them are going to love geography. Some of them are going to love English or business. But how we access those students, how we engage them, has to start with learning about who those students are. Chances are, Mr. Miller or your neighbor or Madame Edwards, that what you loved about them was there was something really compelling about them as an engaging educator, and how they engaged with you as a person. How did they see you, not just as a learner, not just as a history student, but really seeing you as a person? So I think that when I think about the answer to this question, it really starts with that place, is how do we ensure that as educators, we are engaging young people as holistic people and as learners. And so it really starts with an engagement of who young people are first and foremost. And so Facing History's pedagogical journey, I put it into the Padlet. Our approach really starts with the identity piece. How do we talk about who we are as individuals? And then getting to your question, Melissa, I want to bring in James Baldwin, who's a 20th century social critic, who says that history, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to be read. And it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us and are unconsciously controlled by it. And history is literally present in all that we do. And I'll pop that into chat as well. History is very much a part of who we are. And so if we're going to engage young people in history, we have to start by understanding who young people are, what kinds of modalities engage with them, whether it's bringing in music or inviting young people to be looking at art as a primary source artifact, or looking at diary for those who like English and personal first-hand narratives. It's about humanizing that history in all the different ways that we are human, and bringing that in, including moral dilemmas. And so when we engage young people in learning deeply about those histories and the kinds of moral dilemmas that people faced in the past, we can then learn those histories and how those moral dilemmas continue to live in our present day, and how that past continues to live in our present day and informs the world that we live in.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I love that interaction you had there. And it's just so inspiring and engaging to see all those teachers' names pop up, and just see how we have a role in this too. It's not just about the content, it's about how we live out our passion for history. I love that. And so that brings me to my second question. Talking about how we interact with history. So the second question is this: how do we interact with history without falling into apologism and presentism? And now I know those two words may not be very familiar with some of our guests and today, but I just want to define it for us in the context that we are talking about it today. First, starting with presentism. Presentism is when we impose our current perspectives or perspectives from 2024 or wherever we are right now onto the past. So our values, our ideas, the way we think, we impose that into our view of the past. So that's presentism. And then we have apologism, which is almost on the other side of the spectrum, where you kind of dismiss certain things as, oh, that's just the way it was back then, and we just kind of let it go. So there's kind of dangers, benefits and dangers to both sides. So I would like to just start this question off first by again pointing it to Rachel first, just because you have a strong focus on the historical thinking concepts in SSENC. Maybe you can speak a little on historical perspectives and your thoughts on that. Thank you,
It's
Rachel.
100% what my notes here say. It's really all about taking historical perspectives. One of my favorite tools to use is the bio poem. It's in the Big Six, and Val is nodding. Valerie Amo and I, we're on this journey together with historical thinking a million years ago, and
still using it.
I know,
Rachel.
it's so great. So the poem is such a fantastic way to get kids thinking really how people thought back then. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to get kids closer, like you have to get them actually reading the primary sources themselves, or viewing them, or listening to them, or whatever modality works, but getting them to listen to the stories of the people who lived it, because it's very easy to make generalizations from our present viewpoint, one way or the other, but to listen to the people themselves, you get a deeper sense of that complexity. And I really feel like that's key. And I'm gonna call you out here, Val. But Valerie Amo and I used to teach together, and one of the things that she brought to the table with our sort of introduction to historical thinking was these CBC radio archive pieces to teach about the October crisis, and they had like a Francophone caller calling into a talk show and an Anglophone caller calling into the same or slightly different CBC talk show about what was going on in October of 1970. And it's so revealing. Like, you cannot help but like feel when you listen to those people about the power at play, the personal impact that those events had on people. So I think getting as close as you can to those sources is really important. I also think that both metacognition and getting into civic action are really important, but I'm going to leave my space to some other people for a bit.
Thank you, Rachel. And I love, again, bringing back those primary sources and hearing directly from those people that experienced that period. I'm going to pass it to Jasmine. Do you have anything to add? What are your thoughts on apologism and presentism?
First, I want to say that I love Rachel's response, and I love that you started with that. Like, my head also went there to historical thinking and complexity and nuance in those particular stories. So I love that that's where you started as well. I agree with Rachel that I think that students can develop and hold complexity and nuance. At Facing History, our approach is reflected in our tagline, which is people make choices and that choices make history. And so we can understand that people are complex. We start with that. What does it look like for us to be making decisions? How do we understand sociology and psychology around choice making and think about our own choice making in a contemporary context as an anchor, so that we can, and because what we share in common with people in the past is they are also human beings. And so how do we understand the complexity of making choices both within our own time, and also then develop the deep knowledge of context, of historical context, of ideologies that animate hatreds or other sort of sentiments of the time. Excuse me. I think we can engage young people in understanding logics, norms, or ideologies in context of a time through deep dives into into histories. And we can also engage young people in that sort of social psychology understanding and acknowledge that ideologies of the past and choices that individuals make, we can look at the harms that they cause. And so, you know, wrestling with both the idea that they are humans who are fallible, humans who make a context, or sorry, who make decisions within a context and who are animated by particular beliefs and whose actions cause harm. So we can wrestle with that complexity. The other layer I want to throw into this, to add on to this, is we've done some learning with Miranda Fricker, who is the Julia Silver Professor and co-director of, this is a mouthful, New York Institute of Philosophy, and the author of Blaming and Forgiving, the Work of Morality. And she says this: the proper standards by which to judge people are the best standards that were available to them at that time, or at the time. So not only are we thinking about choices and people, but we're also asking students, or we're asking ourselves, to find the sources that help us to see within those histories. How is it that we see people who have stood against, or spoke against, or discovered conclusions that ran counter to those times? And can we use those historical perspectives as the bar by which people of that time could be measured against other people of that time? Yeah. And I think if I was to sort of throw a reading into the mix, for educators here who are like, I'd love a reading that helps to bring up moral complexity. I've just dropped one into the chat. This one is about moral luck and dilemmas. Okay. And so that's one that educators can bring into their classrooms to really think about the complexity of how we judge choices in the past.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine, for sharing the quotes and the reading. I know for sure I will be taking a look at that after our session. And thank you for bringing up your point on humanity. I know Rachel touched on this too, but I think this segues nicely into maybe what Heidi can share on when we're looking at genocide, we're looking at the worst side of humanity. So how do we bring that into the conversation about apologism and presentism?
First of all, I'm so impressed with both Rachel and Jasmine's answers. I'm learning from both of you. Trust me, I'm coming from a different side. But I just want to mention before that, in studying past history, especially history that deals with war, human rights, and violations and genocides, I think we have to take the approach of viewing the facts neutrally, using language that is carefully chosen so as not to give a bias or a judgment to that event. For example, when our presenter goes out and talks about her grandmother being in the Armenian genocide, in the 1915 Armenian genocide, she takes great care. She says great care should be taken to not imply denial of the deliberate killing of the Armenian people in Turkey. And this avoids the trap of either defending an abuse or rights or viewing the values of the time from our perspective and values of today. And once you're giving the facts in these presentations, only then can students decide for themselves if the event or action is a violation of right. And it's very difficult to avoid judging past attitudes without applying current values. For example, John A. Macdonald calling for removing the Indian from the Indian. But they have to learn that we can't erase or cancel the past, just acknowledge it. And I have, I think, a good personal example. So when I was reviewing my presentations that I give based on my mother's testimonial and based on her book, Witness to Horror, that I give in person in schools, you hear my mother talking about, and it was the Ukrainians that came, and I heard them in Ukrainian saying, we have to shoot the Jews and get rid of them. And at one point during the war with Ukraine and Russia, I said, oh my God, how can I talk about the Ukrainians that way? And of course, but I realized that this was part of history and students have to learn about it. And I still go back and I say that when students listen to a live presentation, an interactive presentation, they get this better understanding. They get a very, very true understanding, and they could make their own judgments after.
Thank you, Heidi. I think you brought a very interesting perspective to the table, especially when we're talking about genocide, something that's hard for educators themselves to speak about, and just the way we as educators have the onus on, we decide how we want to frame certain issues as well. So thank you for that, Heidi. I'm going to move on to our third question of the evening. Our third question is this: how do we reconcile and come to terms with the different narratives students bring to the table? And Heidi, I'm going to invite you to join me first on this one, because as we know, our students are not all from one place. We all come from a diverse backgrounds, and in fact, some students might learn history very differently than another student who learned it from their own country, right? So how did we come together in talking about something like genocide that can be very, very divisive?
First of all, I want to say this is a very a positive thing for productive learning. Each student, as you mentioned, has a different background and different views of the world instilled in them from the time they're children, by their parents and their community. And this diversity is what opens up the eyes of other students. And this can prevent the us against them narrative that is so divisive. And the key is for teachers to allow for respectful dialogue when discussing a controversial topic, and to allow for different viewpoints on the topic. So, for example, even though we're giving Holocaust presentations in schools, there's some Muslim students in there, but so far the students that these teachers that I've met have handled it beautifully by having a discussion in their classroom with the Muslims and with the Jewish students. So when we go to schools to give a presentation on a particular genocide, we're aware that the student body is going to make up of students who are of different cultures, races, and even gender identities. Our goal is to allow them to listen to a story of someone who experienced hate and intolerance, and to see the universal message that prejudice affects everyone, no matter what their background is. We have found from student responses to our follow-up questionnaires that 90% feel empathy for the survivor of racism, no matter if the survivor is Jewish, Armenian, Rwandan, or Indigenous.
What a powerful, powerful statement, Heidi. Thank you for bringing this in. I see a question in the chat that I want to bring to everyone's attention as well. So I invite our following speakers, if you want to speak on the next question that I'm going to bring up, or the initial question that I have, you're open to do so. But what happens when those facts contradict one another, or what we perceive as facts contradict with one another? Of course, we bring different perspectives to the table, but what if they contradict? What do we do then? So I invite Jasmine to come share your experience teaching in adult learning environments, as well as classroom environments as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've been asked a lot in the last couple of years to talk about what it means to have civil discourse, and what does it mean to hold space for controversial conversations. And I think this is why at Facing History we lean a lot on setting up norms with students and contracts. And I don't mean it in a sense of like, we're just going to spend 5-10 minutes, which obviously in adult learning spaces, sometimes that's what we need to do. But in classrooms, how do we honor the need for reflective dialogue and for real conversations that are difficult and that are challenging, because the perspectives that we bring, the lived experiences that we have, are going to be different because we live in a diverse society. And I think one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about in terms of those norms is, what does it look like for us to take a stance of curiosity? To really take a stance of curiosity, to begin our responses with a question, to be able to name the places where we agree, but also to be asking questions to seek understanding where we disagree. I think that that's something, one of the sort of 3 or 4 norms that we've been really thinking a lot about when it comes to having these kind of difficult conversations. The other thing that I think has been really helpful lately has been, and this is not always the case, but the 2 things can also be true at the same time. I think the lived experiences that different students bring can be, and the experience can be both true even when it seems to paradoxically conflict with the experience of someone else who holds a different experience. And yet, you know, as historians, we would say that there are times when historical evidence doesn't hold for certain perspectives. And so as historians, our role is to address those falsehoods with scholarship. It's really to dive into those histories behind the histories so that young people have the real context, have the facts behind the sometimes the opinions, right? And then the last thing I want to add, and this really comes out of a participant who was on a contemporary anti-Semitism course. He referenced the scholar Adam Grant. He's an organizational theorist, and his book around Think Again. And he said this, and I did a little bit of research, and I love this. Adam Grant says, one of the questions that we can have in our back pockets is, how do you know? Which is a really simple question. It comes from a place of curiosity, and we can help to both create moments of cognitive dissonance for students who might say, oh, how do I know? And how do I know this? And hold tension when there are things that are the opposite that are also true. So I think that we can use that kind of line of questioning, of curiosity, to help young people and then present accurate information.
Yeah,
but that's a whole other workshop.
It's beautiful. I love this posture of curiosity. It's not antagonizing, but it's just a genuine, wonder. And that kind of ties back to our norms that we first talked about being humble. That's something very challenging, of course, but thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we'll keep that in mind as well. And finally, Rachel, I invite you to join in our discussion here. I know that in your resources, you have some resources that speak specifically to differing perspectives. For example, the different stories for middle years on the Korean War.
Oh, thank you. That's a lovely one. So yeah, I think I would definitely agree with what Jasmine said, and I would just sort of urge just a little bit of storytelling from my own experience in the classroom. So I would usually spend time on those norms. Like I spent the first day and a half. So with some classes it was 2 or 3 days. Some of them was less than a day. Really working out those norms, and like we went through a whole consensus building process so that everybody knew where we were coming from and that we had this foundation that we could come back to when conflicts arose later on in the school year. But yeah, I can talk about the middle year school lesson. So in our beautiful book, we have 5 lessons. There's an elementary one, a middle one, and then 3 high school lessons. In the middle years inquiry, it's what do different stories tell us about the Korean War? So we kind of started with this when we started this project. Senator Yana Martin, who is of Korean Canadian, and she came to us with this story about this hockey game in 1952, which you see on the cover of the book, and played by Canadian soldiers behind the lines when the Imjin River froze over. And so we were very interested in this story, the Imjin Classic. Thank you, Corto. So yes, we were very excited to bring this story to students in the classroom. We know, hockey is usually a pretty popular topic with teachers and students, but we didn't want to just leave it there with just the stories about the hockey game. I think it's an interesting way to come into the Korean War, but we also wanted to bring in the more challenging aspects of the Korean War and why that hockey game was so important, because of the rest of the desolation in Korea at the time. There wasn't very much for the soldiers to do to stay occupied and to kind of raise their spirits. And so then we bring in a lot of the other stories. And this inquiry is really great because we have pictures, we have photographs that are then matched to the accounts of that event by the people that were there. And it's kind of centered on the hockey game and then the photographs of Paul Tomlin and then a range of other photographs of other experiences. So Paul Tomlin was sort of the official war photographer of the Korean War, and he had some very stunning photographs that you've probably seen before, and he tells the story of how that photograph was taken. So it's a little bit about corroborating evidence, but also about like getting into some of those more different narratives and how there were very different stories from office clerks and cooks to, you know, frontline soldiers to support people.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that resource. I've seen it myself, just talking about how one story can be viewed from so many different perspectives and points of view. And that's exactly what we're trying to talk about here today. And that brings me to our last question for the evening. And I invite our panelists, if you wish to answer, you will respond in French as well. The final question is this: how do we balance sanitization of history and the trauma-informed pedagogy? Being aware of our students' backgrounds, what they may have experienced, what are they bringing in, but also just being cognizant of their emotional state. So I invite Jasmine to first speak on this because I know a big piece of facing history in ourselves is that emotional engagement. Jasmine, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think this is why when we think about a facing history approach and where we started was that identity and that contracting. And really, it's about building a community that can hold space and can really hold emotions and emotional content. I think if we are going to be bringing in content that is going to be vulnerable for students, that is going to be hard, that is going to touch on our identities and our humanity, how are we first fostering those kinds of spaces where connection, where relationship, where respect are part of the waters of that classroom? And where, I mean, Rachel talked about this earlier as well, where civic engagement and we're coming together in allyship, in community as a collective is part of how we wrestle with and come out of safely out of difficult histories. I also want to say that trauma-informed pedagogy is just good pedagogy. We don't know the kinds of experiences students are bringing in, and we also we can't assume that what is happening in the classroom, what we're teaching, is not going to prompt vicarious trauma. This idea that by hearing difficult and encountering difficult testimonies, that we are not going to shut down, emotionally and physically disengage, or and that this is especially true for people who are very empathetic. So what does this mean? I think when educators are thinking about selecting sources, certainly you have to know your students. You're thinking about what is age appropriate. You're thinking about the goals for sharing, right? What is it? What is your intention? And then you're also looking for resources that humanize people. You're looking for victim and survivor voices. What you're going to avoid is looking for the images and the videos that are shot by perpetrators. When we look at pictures of the Holocaust, for example, well, oftentimes the photos that are taken, the really dehumanizing photos, are actually the photos that were taken by perpetrators. And so why is it that we would in our classrooms want to center perpetrators' views of victims? Instead, we want to look at photographs, at artwork, at poetry, at literature, at diaries, and personal accounts that talk about those experiences, that humanize those individuals, and not just in that moment, but what was their life like before?
Absolutely.
What is it that we lost? And then how is it that those individuals, if they survived, what does life look like for them to rebuild? Because that is the whole of that human experience, and that has a lot to teach us.
What a beautiful way to tie in art as well. And we know we love having our cross-curricular connections, but this is such a beautiful way to incorporate voice through art and music. So thank you that, Jasmine. I'm going to pass it now to Heidi, speaking on genocide. Of course, this is a very challenging topic, not just for us as educators, but it's almost a question that many of us think about for at what age is it appropriate to start talking about genocide and teaching this in our classrooms?
So first of all, this is something we deal with all the time. How we make students feel the tremendous impact of the consequences of racism and hate by using graphic incidents and images without possibly turning them off the subject by triggering past or present traumas and fears. We feel that it's very important, while not bombarding students with graphic and violent images, to still retain this content while respecting their fears and feelings. Most of our presentations that what we go to schools with, and our guide that we have on studying genocide for teachers, is meant at the grade 10 and grade 11 and grade 12 level. Before that, some of these presentations we send into schools are really difficult. So I could give you actually two examples. So one example, a grade 10 teacher wanted us to remove some images in our presentation of the Armenian genocide given by the granddaughter of a survivor, because these images showed a hanging of victims. We had to have a discussion with the teacher and explain to her that this photo, apart from being readily available in any text on genocide, was very relevant to deny the claims by some that deny this genocide. We offer to have the presenter mention to the students at the outset that some images may be triggering and that they could leave the room or ask for assistance if anything upset them. In the end, the teacher agreed. The presentation went ahead and no one raised their hand to be allowed to leave. I've had that experience also with my mother's presentation, in terms of that she saw her best friend raped and murdered in front of her eyes. She saw her mother murdered, machine gunned while she was hiding in an attic. And basically beforehand, and she saw her father and brother taken away from her. We ask the teachers, we tell the teachers, we ask them if they're comfortable with it. And we have never yet been in a situation where a student walked out of the class or walked out of the hall, or they have a grade 10 or 11. I would say that they've seen this before, and that they can actually listen to it and understand it. At the same time, this type of history shouldn't be reduced to simple statistics, which can be overwhelming. For example, 6 million men, women, and children murdered in the Holocaust. We must keep the human dimension very present by examining individual stories of the victims of this history, which makes history more relevant to young people, to create empathy and empowerment. And again, in our presentations, I just want to mention, we always begin with what was life before, life during, and life after.
Okay.
So those are very, very important things that we talk about as well, that Jasmine mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm starting to notice that through all of these questions, the theme that keeps coming up is the humanity in all of this. At the end of the day, history is our story, right? So thank you, Heidi, for another powerful response, and for sharing this with us as well. Lastly, I'm just gonna call on Rachel once again. I know SSENC has a big focus on ongoing training and preparing teachers. So how can teachers be prepared to navigate trauma and use trauma-informed pedagogy and balance and be careful of the sanitization of history as well?
So I have a bunch of notes, but I think given the way the discussion's going, I think I want to focus on just saying that, like, you need to trust yourself a little bit, and stay attuned to your own feelings in dealing with this. And I think that you also need to be aware of the impact of these teaching this, this kind of content on yourself, and take care for yourself. I think there's a real emotional impact that teaching, history, and particularly traumatic histories, can have on us as teachers. And I think lean on your colleagues, and lean on your support systems. I also think that, you don't need to do this alone. Some of the ways that I learned how to be a really good teacher was by using resources that other people had created that were excellent. So use the Facing History in Ourselves resources, use the Foundation for Genocide Studies, use this book is free. You're going to get a copy, but you have to sign up for it. But use the things that, stand on the shoulders of giants, and make sure that so that you have the tools to help prepare you. You don't need to make it up, nor should you. Start with what's already there. Yes, Jan, le reste a beaucoup de choses en français. Tout est complètement bilingue. Cet livre ici, c'est bilingue des deux côtés. So yeah, I think take care of yourself and lean on what's already been done, and that's the way you're gonna learn how to use all these great tools that are at your fingertips. And I also think one more, that it's just like, don't veer into sanitizing history, because like Jasmine and Heidi said, it's really about we need to tell these histories, to counter the denialism, and to make sure that students know the truth of what happened. But you need to be prepared. You can't just engage willy-nilly. But yeah, if we don't go there, then it's not engaging for students. And kind of circling back to that beginning, like one of my students, I think high school students in particular are very concerned with what's fair and what is justice. And I think that's our avenue in, and that's what all of these stories can help us navigate together.
Yeah, and what an inspiring note to end on it. I think it's so validating for us as history teachers, to recognize, what we do is not easy at all, and it's okay to say that. And thank you, Rachel, for bringing that point up. So I think I'm going to leave the panel there. Thank you so much. I think I speak on behalf of everyone here. Your words have been so inspiring, so informative. I took a ton of notes, and I just wish I could just listen to you guys the rest of the night. But now, of course, we want to give all of you some time to talk with one another, and engage with some of the material that we've discussed tonight. So again, thank you to our amazing panelists for taking the time to share your insight. But thank you for engaging in our conversation, in our activity as well. And hopefully this is something you can use in your classroom as well. I know that unfortunately Jamboard is going to be removed or something in December, but until December you can use Jamboard. But this is easily adaptable into something that is more tactile, where you can use chart paper, sticky notes. Again, something for you to engage your students in thinking before beginning a full discussion. Okay, so our final thoughts here for tonight. So unfortunately, we do not have time to go back into redoing the poll, but this is something you can do in your own classrooms, just to revisit the same questions that we did in the beginning. Of course, we haven't been engaging with your students in this session, but maybe taking a look at the second question: how comfortable are you with having challenging conversations in your classroom? How's your thinking maybe evolved after listening to our panelists? And it's okay if it hasn't, because at the end of the day, it's called a challenging conversation. It will be challenging. And as Rachel very eloquently put, it is something that we can support each other in. And that's why we have this session, so we can learn together and help each other as we navigate these contested terrains in the history classroom. I want to leave you with this Padlet link. This is the same Padlet link that we had in our previous session, but I invite you again to hop on the Padlet if you have any resources that you would like to share. I know our panelists have access to the Padlet as well, and I'm sure that they are more than happy to share some of the resources that they mentioned in the panel, as well as some of the other resources that maybe we do not know about. So that this is a collaborative space once again. So we want to share and help each other out. So feel free, use the QR code. The link will be posted in the chat, and just take a peruse around our Padlet, our resources. And of course, we have our survey that we did last time. Thank you for those of you that took the time to use this survey. We took your feedback into consideration, and we will continue to do so for our next very exciting session, which will happen on March 19th, which will be on challenging conversations on politics. So we look forward to that one. Before I continue to thank our sponsors, I just want to pass the floor quickly to our panelists. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave with our guests tonight before we part ways? I know we have 1 minute left, but if you are comfortable staying, please do stay as we hear our concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Melissa. If it is okay if I go first.
Yeah.
So just so you know, in the Padlet, I put the link to the book, which is all available for free online. You can download it and use it tomorrow. But I can send you a very pretty copy of the book. It looks really nice and is in French and English. But you also so if you want a copy, I've put the link to the Google form. I see that a number of you have already put in your order, which is great. I'll just ship them. I'll send them in the mail to you. We also have some OHASSTA resources that we developed on Korean economy and democracy that you are welcome to order as well. I have some copies that we intended to give out at the OHASTA conference so I'm happy to ship those to you. And then I also put a little note about a UK travel opportunity in August. So SSENC is partnering with the Korean War Legacy Foundation, which is in the US. And they have, so this is where I met Melissa last summer at and many people were there as well. So the World Congress on the Teaching of the Korean War next summer is going to be in Cambridge in the UK. And so if you have used these resources in your classroom or one of the lessons in your classroom, you are invited to apply to share your experience with sort of a number of teachers from around the world, including a whole bunch of UK teachers. And there's a little bit more detail at that link. So just to have a think about all those great opportunities.
Thank you, Rachel, and for sharing all the resources and the opportunity too. Heidi, are you
Yes,
with us?
I just want to mention to everybody, I mentioned it in the chat room, this guide is available because I know we have some French teachers. This guide is available in French and English. It's free, and it's available online if you go to our Foundation for Genocide Education website. But also equally important, because of the huge demand for presentations, and of course, Armenians and Rwandans and First Nations can't go everywhere in Canada. We are starting to have them online. So we have filmed with a professional filmmaker. They are available for people visual in their classes, depending on what side that they're teaching at.
Thank you, Heidi, and we look forward to those presentations as well. Jasmine, any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with us before we part ways?
Just a very deep appreciation for all the educators who took time out of their busy schedules to come. We know that educators are the backbone of our communities, and you don't get thanked enough. So thank you so much. And I hope that I'll see you at upcoming professional development. The link is in the Padlet. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a good night.
Yes, and on behalf of OHASSTA-AESHO, I thank you to Jasmine, Heidi, and Rachel for your expertise and sharing your knowledge with all of us. I think I speak for all of us when we learned so much. I myself am feeling more empowered than ever to tackle and to fight through these difficult conversations and have these conversations that will ultimately help us grow better together as a society. And with that, that concludes our presentation for our challenging conversation session 2 on history. We thank our sponsors once again for making this night possible. And thank you. I look forward to seeing all of you again March 19th to talk about politics.